Hi, this is the first of my 4-part video with valuable information and strategies towards supporting children and teens experiencing anxiety. I am Gillian Zocher, and over the past 22 years I've helped tens of thousands of teachers, parents and children with a range of challenging challenges. Hello and welcome to this course, Anxiety in Children and Adolescents, How to Help Them Manage Big Emotions. Anxiety is a complex combination of emotions that includes fear, dread, apprehension and worry, often combined with the physical symptoms such as a racing heart, fast breathing, lightheadedness, fluttering butterflies, pins and needles, nausea, dry mouth, difficulty swallowing, and many more. It's the brain's response to danger and stimuli that we actively attempt to avoid. A perpetual cycle of feeling overwhelmed, which you can feel happening. It's a biological response, not a thing, that results in a feeling that something challenging or bad is going to happen. Childhood and adolescence are the core risk phases for the development of symptoms and syndromes of anxiety, ranging from transient, which means those anxieties that are natural in a child's development, onto mild symptoms or full-blown chronic anxiety disorders. Research shows that 1 in 6 children between the age of 5 and 16 have problems with their mental health. That's 5 or 6 children in every classroom. It was also confirmed that eating disorders are on the increase. Half of all students with learning difficulties have mental health challenges. The leading cause of death between the ages of 5 and 34 is suicide. 83% of anxious children felt the pandemic made matters even worse. A recent Murdoch Children's Research Institute survey found 14% of 4 to 17-year-olds have a diagnosable mental health condition, meaning roughly 600,000 Australian children and young people are in need of mental health support. This poses an enormous challenge for schools, as mental health and well-being are not part of teacher training. Research by Georgetown University in the USA found that approximately 5.6 million children, that's 9.2%, had been diagnosed with anxiety problems, and 2.4 million, that's 4%, had been diagnosed with depression. This short course will offer helpful research findings and practical information to help improve early recognition of anxiety and how best to support children and teenagers so that you know to refer them to specialist support. This anxiety response in the human brain is a basic intrinsic emotional response, already present in infancy and childhood. Like most difficulties, it's also on a continuum, which means that it can range from mild to severe. According to the American Psychological Association, anxiety can, however, become maladaptive. Example, when it's associated with avoidance behavior, most likely to occur when anxiety becomes over-frequent, more severe, and they face persistent or relentless anxiety. Professor Schultz from Understood explains these levels of anxiety and how some children are simply born more anxious than others. And if exposed to anxiety, they're more sensitive to it and more likely to become more anxious. The differentiation between normal and persistent anxiety can be difficult in children because they manifest many fears and anxieties as part of their typical childhood development as they grow. Morris and Kratoch's research highlights that in most children, anxiety is typically transient. So that means it lasts for a short period of time. In other words, these anxieties typically do not persist in children. And it's worth remembering that children all develop at varying rates as well. So let's take a look at some of these transient anxieties, those natural or normative anxieties and fears in children and teenagers. In early infancy, it's perfectly natural to need physical contact. In late infancy, they might be shy in the company of strangers. It's normal. At 12 to 18 months, they might experience different levels of separation anxiety. When they're 2 or 3, they may experience fear of thunder, lightning, darkness, fire, or even animals. And the symptoms are crying, clinging, withdrawal, freezing, seeking security, and physical contact. At age 4 to 5, the fear of death or dead people might emerge. Between 5 and 7, a fear of specific objects, animals, monsters, ghosts, germs, getting a serious illness, or even natural disasters may come into play. Later, they may experience school anxiety and performance anxiety, and by the age of 12 to 18, they could fear peer rejection and negative evaluation. That's a big one. Now, depending on how these stages are nurtured or managed relative to the child's natural levels of anxiety, can result in specific phobias, stress disorders, and general anxiety disorder or social anxiety disorders. With all of this in mind, the assessment process of childhood fears and anxiety in children at a young age may cause challenges. Researchers McCarthy and Spence, even back in 1991, warned clinicians to take the developmental differences into consideration when assessing for anxiety disorders, such as a child's cognitive understanding of that experience, their language skills, and their emotional understanding, those learning challenges, that neurodiversity that we so often talk about. So let's look at the example of peer relationships, which provide a unique context in which children learn a range of critical social emotional skills. They learn empathy, cooperation, problem-solving strategies. Peer relations, however, can also contribute negatively to social emotional development through bullying, exclusion, or deviant peer processes. This highlights the need to lead by example as adults, to nurture an ethos of kindness, an ethos of empathy and understanding within the school environment as a preventative measure by including those key support systems within our schools if socializing starts to go wrong for them. So the process is really rejection from peers onto fear of negative evaluation onto social anxiety disorder. Years ago, I had a student who had an incredible vocabulary, excellent general knowledge, and was quite bossy in a nice sort of way. His handwriting was shocking, an embarrassment to him, but given the opportunity to discuss neurodiversity in the classroom, he was no longer embarrassed by it. He used technology. Others understood his significant strengths. They became aware of their own strengths and their own weaknesses. This is an important point, as if strengths aren't recognized and acknowledged in those who struggle most, then the focus is only ever on their challenges, which has an enormous impact on their mental health, self-esteem, and social skills. Many years ago, I helped students at a youth support centre, teenagers who had dropped out of school, children with various challenges in both learning and home life, and one lad who was very bright, had a fabulous sense of humour, told me that the final straw for him at school was the fact that he was dyslexic. The teacher knew this. He also happened to be the class clown, popular, and one day the teacher, who had likely had enough of him on that particular day, asked him to stand up and read aloud for the class. Clearly a task which instilled a sense of dread for him, as reading to himself was challenging enough, but reading aloud required him to verbalize too, follow words accurately, read at speed, which made him vulnerable and anxious. Aware of the errors he was about to make, he would look dumb and he felt humiliated, and he walked out and never went back. One single event. What are the ramifications of that? We will talk more about adults and our mental health in this course, because if you're not in the right state of mind yourself, then you simply won't be equipped to help others who may be vulnerable. Anxiety disorders are described and classified in the international diagnostic systems, such as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the International Classification of Diseases. Across these systems, many anxiety disorders share common clinical features, such as extensive anxiety, which is that excessive and persistent level of worry and fear. Also symptoms of physiological anxiety, for example, that churning feeling in your stomach. Also behavioral disturbances, such as extreme avoidance of feared objects and the distress associated with that. Nonetheless, differences exist, and it should be noted that narrowly categorizing anxiety orders such as purely panic disorder or agoraphobia, or subtypes such as PTSD or OCD and more, exhibit a substantial degree of differences between one individual and another. An example of anxiety within the classroom is with Dr. Schuster from the Child Mind Institute. He explains that when he was teaching, he would notice that when he had to call on someone or had to figure out whose turn it was to speak, it was like the anxious kid always just tended to disappear. He says the eager child makes eye contact. They give you some kind of physical presence in the room, like putting their hand up saying, "Pick me, pick me." But when a child is anxious about answering questions in front of everyone, they break eye contact. They might look down. They might start writing something, even though they're not really writing something. What they're trying to do is break the connection with the teacher in order to avoid what's making them feel anxious, make the teacher choose someone else instead, someone who is obviously wanting to answer and not them. If they do get called on, sometimes children get so anxious that they freeze. They might very well have been paying attention to the lesson, and they might even know the answer, but when they're called upon, their anxiety level becomes so heightened that they can't respond. Once again, your observation skills are key. If questions are asked in front of others, you could forewarn them. Give 3 questions out, say you'll get back to them in a few minutes, give them time to think, or let them work with a friend to answer the question. When a child starts doubting their abilities in a subject, anxiety can become a factor that gets in the way of learning or showing what they know. Sometimes this can be mistaken for a learning disorder when in fact it's really just anxiety. However, anxiety goes hand in hand with learning disorders. When children start noticing that something is harder for them than other children, and that they're falling behind, and that they need more help, and that they always seem to be asking for help, and they don't want to be seen as stupid, they understandably get anxious. And this period before a learning disorder is diagnosed can be particularly stressful for them. In 2019, the UK government commissioned an all-party parliamentary group chaired by MP Sharon Hodgson to discuss the emotional and physiological impact of poorly supported dyslexia and specific learning difficulties. And the results were astounding. Many highly emotional quotes were included in this report by parents such as, "I feel I failed my child by placing him in the education system that doesn't cater for him." Other quotes were by politicians. This report is stark reading and shows irrefutably that we need to do more to identify people with specific learning difficulties sooner and support them better to reduce the emotional and mental health issues that are currently too prevalent. And quotes from specific learning difficulties groups. The question screaming out for an answer is, knowing what we know and have known for the last 40 years, why are we forcing dyslexic children through an education system that can have a traumatic effect on them, is of little benefit, and can have lifelong emotional repercussions? Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Feel free to subscribe, and remember to click on that link below to make sure you get your free resource.